I live not too far away from every large mall. It's nice because I can do almost all my shopping there, really anything aside from basic stuff and groceries I would get at the mall. I remember that one time last year I went there sometime in the late afternoon. I went around and did a good amount of shopping. The mall was pretty busy, but it's usually there's always tons of other people there doing stuff. So it was probably sometime at night when I left and it was dark out. The mall was much quieter now than it had been several hours earlier when I had arrived. There was a large parking garage connected to the mall, and there's other parking outside of that as well. I had parked in the parking ramp at, I believe, the third level that day, so I walked out, and when I was approaching my car, I remember seeing a young woman in crutches heading in my direction. She called out to me saying hi, and it turned around, and then I said back to her. I did not recognize her and didn't know why. She was greeting, but the woman slowly made her way closer to me in crutches. As I was about to get into my car, she asked me if I wouldn't mind driving her to her car. She said that she had parked on another level, but mistakenly thought she parked on that floor. It was difficult for her to move around with the crutches and just wanted me to help her find her car. She didn't seem sketchy, and I felt compelled to help her. If I said no, I would have felt like a big jerks. I would told the woman to hop, and she put her crutches in the back seat of my car. As I put my bags in, then I got into the driver's seat and the woman got into the front passenger seat. I asked her if she remembered the level that her car was on, and she said no, but she thought that it was lower. She said that she had never been to the mall before and was from a small town or something, so she wasn't used to large parking lots. At first she was pretty nice and friendly. I continued to drive around slowly and then went down a level. We drove all around the second level to the parking structure, and the woman didn't really say anything after I went up and down every single ezel. I asked the woman if it looked familiar, and she said no, suthin. I went down to the ground level. After driving around the ref for at least 5 minutes, she still couldn't find her car. I was surprised because to me it seemed impossible to lose a car that bad. You would think that she would know at least the general area that it was in, and there were not that many other cars around. With it being late, so it was easier to see all the ones that were there. Eventually the woman told me that she thought she actually parked outside of the parking garage and just nearby it. That's when it seemed really weird. How could she think that she was in the parking garage when she actually wasn't? I didn't say anything though, and just kept driving, so we left the parking structure, and then she seemed to magically remember. She told me to drive around the corner and to the right. There was a smaller sort of secluded parking lot. There it was between some trees in the parking structure. Mostly it was used as overflow parking if the mall was super busy. I drove over there and it was not very well lit. There sitting alone was a black 4-door sedan that looked to be about 20 years old. It was parked in the far corner next to a tree and was the only car in this particular parking lot. The woman said that that was her car and that I could just drive up and park right next to it. She said thanks for driving her around. I was relieved that she found it, but I was also very confused. I was thinking, how could she forget that she parked out here? But I was just glad to finally be on my way. After I would drop her off, I parked next to her car and the woman opened up the door and then got out. She went to the back door and opened it up to get her crutches out of my back seat. Just as she was grabbing them though, I suddenly heard footsteps from behind the cars, or of a zaw movement in my mirror. But it was really dark and it happened fast, so I didn't know what was going on. The next thing I knew, someone was opening the back door to my driver's side of the car. So I knew this was a problem, and my reaction was to hit the gas pedal. I was parked up against a curb with some grass and trees out front and not much space. It turned the wheel and accelerated. My car shot up the curb and briefly into the grass. I immediately went to the left and away from the guy who tried to pent the door and the woman as well. I barely saw that a guy was hanging on to me door, sort of trying to stop me or else get into the car herring with me for a while. And after I made it off the curb from turning, I was back into the parking lot, and I was able to go much faster. The guy had to let go, and I was able to drive away from him. I went pretty fast until I was a good distance away. The parking lot did not have an exit on the way that I had driven to though, so I had to go back. It turned my car around and saw the man running towards me. I also saw the woman jogging behind him, and she was not using crutches at all. Her injury had been fake. She set me up. I hit the gas again and quickly drove for the exit and was able to make it out before they reached me. I heard them yelling and cursing as I drove away. Right after I made it out of there, I called the cops and told them about what happened. I'm 90% sure that they got out of the redo before the cops arrived. Looking back, I'm just happy that I made it out of the safely. I'm not giving any random strangers a ride again. I had a trip to the mall in a time as a child that I will never forget. I had just recently turned 7 years old. My mother took me and my 2 younger sisters to the mall on a time. My mom had to do some shopping and I always enjoyed going to the mall. There were so many stores and they were more interesting than just going to a typical store on this day, in particular when we went. I just recall that it was very busy for some reason. We walked around, and my mom was pretty busy with my siblings after being in the mall. For maybe an hour, I remember that we stopped because one of my younger sister's shoes came untied. My sisters were 3 and 5 at the time, so they were very young. My mother was helping my sister tie her shoe, and I wandered off just that little ways to look in a store window. I'm sure that I was gone for like 30 seconds at least. That's what it felt like. Then I decided to head back, except when I did, my mom was gone. Now looking back, I'm not sure if I went to the bench that my mom was at with my sisters, or if I went to another one. They had all these benches in the middle of the large walkway areas in the mall. Many of them looked very similar. So I'm guessing that I went to the wrong one, and it was very crowded with tons of people walking everywhere. So I looked around, and my mother and sisters were gone. So I panicked. I assumed that they left without me, and these of people, I needed to find them. I started walking around really fast, desperately trying to find my mother. The longer I walked, though, the less I even knew where I was anymore. Pretty soon, I was completely lost. I continued to look at every person that was walking by, hoping that one would be my mother, but I couldn't find her. I felt really dumb, and I didn't know what I was going to do after walking around for probably 20 minutes or so. I remembered that this woman approached me. I just remember that she was older than my mom and had dark hair and glasses. She asked me if I was lost, and I said yes. The woman then told me that she was going to help me find my mother. She told me to follow her and said that everything was going to be okay. I felt better at that point and believed the woman that she would help me find my mom. So Wes started walking through the mall, and I was just following her. I really didn't know the mall layout well or anything after a while. I remember that we went down this one walkway, and all of a sudden, we were going near some exit doors. The woman kept walking towards them. I was pretty sure that my mom wouldn't just leave. Thought that's when I got confused. The woman continued walking, though, all the way to the doors at that point. I asked her why we were leaving. She told me that my mother had left the mall, but she knew where she was. I just didn't believe that when we got to the doorway. I remember that it stopped just at that moment. A man started to walk towards Zeus. It was a mall security guard. Asked the woman who she was. To Meth, the woman didn't say anything and just stood there. The band then said that I had been reported missing. It took out a walkie-talkie and then started to setting into it. At that time, the woman turned and walked away to the doors very quickly and left. The mall, the security guard went over to me and told me to stay by him near the doors, and my mother would be there soon within 5 minutes. My mom was there. Apparently, my mom had been looking a lover form. She told that very same security guard earlier that I was lost and described my appearance and what I was wearing. The other security guards were also informed, and as my mom looked around, they watched the exits. She saw the other woman, who was clearly not my mother, trying to leave with me. I'm really grateful to that security guard. If not for him, I'm not sure what would have happened. I remember that the police got called and stuff, but beyond that, I don't remember much of anything that was aerially crazy. Trip to the mall, though, a few years back. I was working at a mall. I worked in a department store that was sort of in the middle of the mall, and it was usually fairly busy. I had the job for several years, and among all the workers, we had a conspiracy joke about the faded man. He was a person reported by multiple workers and even MS hoppers as a mysterious figure with his face covered. He would allegedly be seen late after hours or in creepy spots during the day. Nobody had any proof, which was kind of odd. None of my friends. Kevin, who worked as a security guard, claimed that he had seen him on camera footage once or twice, but none of us were allowed to view the footage without clearance. Even Kevin said trying to zoom in on the man's face was difficult because the quality of the video just wasn't that great, so he couldn't really identify him. Alotofus didn't buy it, and I was very skeptical, having never seen him myself, though always sort of wanted to. But one night that all changed. It was a little bit before closing, and I had taken the last shift at the store. Most of the other workers had already left. Only my manager, Tony, and I were around doing some late shift work. All of a sudden, it felt like I was being watched. I needed to look around to see who was there, so I stopped and glanced up, but I saw nobody. I thought to myself that it was all in my head as I turned back to my work, though I saw a tall figure standing near the storage door, half hidden in the shadows, just watching me. His face was mostly covered, and he was tall, about 6'6". I couldn't believe it. He was just standing there watching me, or at least that's what it looked like. I couldn't. The army thoughts over my heart pounding. He was real. I stuttered and called out in fear as Tony came running over in a panic, asking what was wrong. I just pointed. Tony had never seen him either, but didn't hesitate to shout, "The mall's closed. You need to leave." The tall man standing in the shadows didn't respond. He didn't even move. Then he took a step towards Suzanne. In that moment, I started to panic badly. I began hyperventilating because it was only Tony and me. In this entire store with a man who was like 6'7" and had been known to disappear in an instant. As Tony and his stepped back fear, the man looked to his left. The man looked to his left as if he saw something and suddenly bolted. I couldn't move, still terrified of what this man could do if he got a hold of us. But Tony sprinted after him without a second thought. I ran after Tony because I didn't want to be left alone, souring behind this guy towards the back room of the store. I couldn't stop shaking as we looked between boxes in the dimly lit back room. All of a sudden, Tony bolted left, sprinting into one of the aisles, disappearing into the darkness. I was left alone again then. I heard a box fall to me right there. He was standing even closer than before this time. I could make out his face a little better. He was about 40 years old, super tall with long hair, a long beard, and just darkness in his eyes. He looked malicious, like he wanted to hurt me. It was a terrible feeling when I saw him staring at me and I couldn't move. He started taking slow steps forward. Then Tony yelled out my name. I looked over in relief to see Tony running back my ways, and then when I looked back towards the man, he was gone. I didn't know if he had disappeared or if he was ever really there, and it was just my imagination. But I was too scared to even process what I thought that just happened. My mind was racing, and I almost blacked out. We searched for a while longer, but couldn't find anything, not a trace. We even checked the footage, but it just had happened to be in a place where no cameras were, as if he knew all the blind spots. I couldn't sleep for days after that, fearing that he had followed us home or something. Weeks later, after taking time off because I was so traumatized, he was finally caught. Tony had seen him one night again and made sure to call the cops this time instead of chasing him. Officers searched the area and found a small crawl space between the ceiling tiles, which had been used to turn into a makeshift campsite. When I read the news report, I learned that the man had been hiding there for almost a whole year. They never released who he was, or how ended up in the Bollinley, that he was still in custody for questioning. I ended up quitting because I couldn't fathom the idea of reliving that situation again. When I worked in retail, I would sometimes get used to seeing the same people shopping in the store. There would be so many regulars who would come in and buy the same item every week or whatever. In my years of working at a clothing store in a mall called Westbrook, I've seen many people multiple times, but there was one customer named Mark who ended up giving me so much trouble that I had to quit a few years ago. I was working at the store in the mall, and I met this skinny man in mid-market. First, he seemed very innocent. I remember meeting him for the first time. He was nice and charming, looked to be in about his mid-40s, and was always nicely dressed. I was working at the counter helping a customer when he came by after looking at the front racks of the store and said hello, asked for advice for a gift for his niece. After a few minutes of chatting about styles and size, she eventually left with a small piece of clothing for the next few weeks. She came by once, maybe twice a week each time. He would say hello again with the same smile and chat for a bit before finding more clothes for his niece. Usually just one item. He'd make jokes about how crazy it was that his niece wanted so much clothing after the first one, but it was odd because he would only buy one thing for her at a time. I didn't look into it much though, because I'm the type of person to mind my own business. But weeks after this kept going, everything started to get weird. Mark began visiting more frequently, to the point where I'd see him almost every day. Sometimes he'd shop in the morning, and sometimes in the afternoon. It was starting to creep me out because he would show up, chit-chat for a bit, and then leave without even buying anything. I asked about his niece multiple times, and he would respond as if they had all of a sudden stopped talking one day. Is a whim walk outside the store without coming in, and then he passed by again and again. I caught them glancing, and each time his eyes looking at the store, as if he were searching for someone without anybody noticing. That same day he walked in straight to me. He made a bit of small talk because I was always super busy, and then he left again. This time I knew something was off. I tried telling my coworkers, and they said if it happened again to let them know. I contacted my nephew, who was a cop, but he said without any certain threat there wasn't much he could do about it, but to keep him updated. Everything was fine for a few days because I stopped seeing him. Then one evening, I was closing up, and as a whim outside the store, pretending to look at the display windows. It was odd because he had already seen the display windows for the past month. I hid behind the counter, and my heart started racing. My coworker just looked at me and laughed at first. I tried to explain exactly how it made me feel, but she didn't think it was a big deal and just walked away laughing. Eventually though, Mark walked away, and I was able to go home. A while later, the following week, Mark started showing up even on my off days. My coworkers told me that he would come and look around, ask for me, and then leave when he found out I wasn't there. I started feeling super uncomfortable and was always paranoid, constantly looking everywhere to see if Mark was around. I think my coworkers were then realizing that this might be an actual problem. He wasn't technically breaking the law though, like my nephew said, so I didn't know what to do. But that same night, I ended up closing again. Now the clothing store I worked at was connected to the walkways of the mall, but also had a door that opened out to the parking lot. After I locked the doors and everything, I was about to walk out into the parking lot and leave. There weren't very many cars left at all. However, I noticed a car parked just a few spaces away from mine. Inside, I could see one light, and I realized that Mark was inside the car staring straight, and I froze it. Then I started to freak out, trying to process what I had seen. My hands were shaking, and I called for my co-worker, Jake, who was also closing with me. I told him everything that happened. I quickly turned around and asked if he could give me a ride home, and Jake said yes. We then left and walked to Jake's care, and I saw Mark still in his car staring at us. But there's the weird part. After that night, when Mark saw me leave with Jake and never showed up again. I haven't seen him in years, and none of my coworkers have mentioned seeing him either. I don't know what he's out there doing, but I'm certain that he must have assumed that I was with Jake and then fled. I've been working maintenance at a mall in Indiana for over a decade. I knew every spot, every floorboard, every flickering light, and every stubborn leak that popped up in that old place. It wasn't even a good job, but I liked how easy and simple. It was one time something really weird happened. Though it started on a normal day at work, the mall had been having some plumbing issues down in the basement level, and I was called in to take a look. The air smelled faintly of mold and old cleaning supplies. I found the pipe that needed fixing and was tightening a bolt when I noticed something strange. A cold breeze of air seemed to be coming from behind a cracked section of the drywall. When I first felt it, it gave a very uncomfortable feeling. I shouldn't feel air 20 feet underground in the middle of the mall. I set my stuff down because like the draft didn't make sense. I ran my hand along the wall and felt it again. The cold air was seemingly seeping through a couple of cracks. My curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a crowbar from my kit and started hitting the drywall. I wasn't really thinking about the damage or the possibility of having to pay for it later, but I didn't care. This was a weird situation. What was revealed was something I didn't expect: an old wooden door that was crumbling and hadn't seemed to be touched in years. I was excited, which was probably wrong since I just destroyed the wall. But I had never had something like this pop at work before. I'd been working there for so long that I never imagined anything like this could be down there. I thought about leaving the door alone, but then I decided, what, forget this, I'm going for it. It twisted the door handle. It wasn't locked, and it swung open with a loud creak. Because of how old it was, I pointed my flashlight and swept it back and forth to see what I could find. It just looked like an old storage room, dust, cobwebs, and the air here even thicker. A scent of mold. There were mannequins standing there, which was strange because mannequins could only be in the clothing department, which I didn't work in. There were also old register stacks of boxes and supplies. Still, something didn't feel right. This wasn't a store that I was aware of anybody using. It must have been really old. I stepped inside and flashed my light around some more to see if I could figure out what exactly it was used for. The boxes weren't filled with old merchandise or anything. They were filled with personal items like wallets, watches, and jewelry. There was even car keys, one which was attached to a small tag with a date written on it, faded in black ink. The oldest date was from 15 years ago. These didn't seem like just lost items. They looked like personal belongings, things people carry with them every day. I picked up a dusty wallet and flipped through it. Inside, it was a driver's license belonging to a young woman named, well, I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to dox her, but her name was Heather. The date on the tag attached to the wallet was from 12 years ago. Then I heard a voice from a ways away. One of my coworkers yelled, "Hey, are you down here?" It led me so much. I've forgotten I was still at work. It was Dave, one of the other maintenance guys, coming to check on me. My hands were so dusty that I ended up dropping the wallet. Dave asked what it was. I went over to him and tried to explain what I had found, showing him the door and the tags. He just laughed and brushed it off. It was probably an old storage room, but I didn't even want to think that I'd been working there as long and I'd never seen anything like it. I spent a long time trying to research what it could possibly be. After that, however, I didn't really find much information. It took what I found to mall security, but they didn't really seem to care much. Probably because they weren't real police. Eventually, in my research though, and from talking to people around the mall, I found out that there was this old security guard who used to work there. Apparently had been fired for stealing from one of the stores. She was also ordered to steal from mall shoppers. Myth theory: if he's the one behind the stuff that I found, he would have access to the secret room with keys probably, and have been stealing from shoppers, whether they left a purse on a bench or maybe had just straight up took stuff. I really don't know, but I notified the local police and they said they would look into it. Since then though, I haven't really heard anything. I quit the job not too long after that, and it's been a